how would you say the top three differences are in terms of doing marketing for B2B company or in a B2C company, especially in China?
Yeah, and you'll have to forgive me a little bit as I answer this question because I really don't have much experience in on the B2C side of things,
That's okay. Yeah.
but I can make a few observations from my understanding of how B2B is different from B2C. And the first thing that I would mention is that in B2B, it requires a lot of collaboration between marketing, sales, and other business development functions
Mm-hmm.
where it's all interrelated. And I've actually recently read some research about this. And when it comes down to generating a sales pipeline for a B2B organization, part of the opportunities come from marketing and through the demand generation function that marketing has in business to business, but still a lot of opportunities come from the sales organization themselves.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
So in a B2B company, marketing doesn't only do branding or build awareness and generate leads, but marketing also has a very important function for sales enablement. And that's to help the salespeople to do their job better.
Right. So when you say that, are you saying are we building in a way like building assets for the salespeople to use to make the sales better? Is that what you mean by sales enablement?
Yeah, that's part of it. That's a very important part of it. But another part of it would just be to work with sales to understand what is the customer's journey
Right.
and understand every step of the way what the salespeople need to move the customer along in that journey.
Hmm. Now, I fully agree with that marketing, especially in a B2B sense. In some B2C, it does make sense as well, especially if you're doing professional services or you're in a service department where there's a sales element to it. Now, if you're doing fast moving consumer goods, probably not because it's about distribution and e-commerce. It's about conversions. But anytime where there's a larger ticket item, a larger service that needs to be rendered, or there's a larger, longer term, there's usually a sales part of it. And I always sort of believe that sales and marketing should always go hand to hand, right? Because the marketing sort of starts the conversation, and it's up to the salespeople to follow up on the rest of the conversation. And if the salesperson doesn't know what the marketing is, it becomes a very disconnected conversation in a way, right?
Right. So depending on the goods that are sold, if you're selling an automobile, for example, you
Mm-hmm.
might need to have that sales enablement function as well. Where if you're selling cereal at a grocery store, that's completely different. Um, but another area I think that would be different from B2B and B2C would be on the fact that usually with B2B products, a lot of B2B products require selling to a purchasing committee where it's not just one person who makes the
Right,
decision, but
right.
it's a group of people. And sometimes you've got over five people that are involved in this decision.
Yep,
So it's a complex sale, and you need to have different personas. You need to have a
yep,
message that hits different people,
right.
and that's really the only way to be successful.
Yeah, no, I'm actually really appreciate you said that because that is a major difference and one um, that is actually crucial because you are essentially selling to five different people who have different reasons of purchasing your product. So having one message, even though you're selling the same thing, you really have to touch on all five different reasons to get that point across.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
It,
So continue. Yeah.
yeah. So I was going to go on to the third, what I think is the third difference, which is
Right.
in B2B, is the importance on relationships. And this it gets into even that buyer committee that's considering your product. You need to
Mm-hmm.
have a relationship with as many of these individuals as possible.
Right.
So this just highlights the importance of the sales function. And this is where marketing, doing the sales enablement, to empower the salespeople to provide the information that they need to build that relationship, to nurture that relationship, will lead to that successful sale in the end.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely a key to B2B as well. I think relationship is always the key to sort of every business. But it is definitely more apparent in B2B because you're dealing with people almost all the time, and the sales process it's an ongoing process. The sales never ends as you close the sales, right? It's always making sure that the customer is getting what they want and keeping it up to date. So I really want to ask a question here in terms of relationship, but I sort of want to ask my next question because I don't want to repeat the same thing, which is, we talked about the difference between B2B marketing and B2C marketing, especially in China. But how does say a B2B company, how does it differ from like American company and we're doing B2B in China from you?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that there are some differences. I'd like to start with a similarity first,
Yes, please.
and I think that the way that companies buy in China is very similar from the way that companies buy in the United States and other parts of the world, and that is that purchasing decisions are really driven by a clear business case, a
Mm-hmm.
clear return on investment. And so I found that is very important in China. In fact, if they can do something in the status quo, which is a reasonable substitute, then they won't buy your product. The products that sell the most in China are the products that you need to have, where there isn't a clear substitute. So if you have a clear business case, this really helps with selling your product.
So when you say clear substitute, are you saying a substitute that's indirect competitor, or a substitute that's cheaper, or what exactly when you say?
Yeah, all of the above, and the substitute. So if you think about software, which is the industry that I'm most familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
the the return on investment often for software is to automate some manual processes. And so the return on investment is the money that you would save for employing people to work hours to get the job done.
Right.
So if they use the software, maybe it only takes 1 hour, whereas if they don't have the software, it takes 8. And so you have a savings of 7 hours for that task, let's say.
Right. Right.
Now, the same sort of consideration happens in China, but it's harder sell in China because the labor that
Mm-hmm.
goes into creating that work, that result, is often less expensive than it is in developed countries. And
Mm-hmm.
because of that, the return on investment is lower and the ultimate price of the product goes down.
Right.
So this is just one business case example.
No, that makes completely sense, and I know that's probably true. So, because labor is still cheaper, generally speaking, it has gone up quite a bit compared to years ago, but it is definitely something that is going to be a stumbling block and a roadblock in terms of alternatives. But I'll let you continue in terms of the other sort of differences.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, I started with similarity, and now I'd like to get into a couple of differences here. The first difference I'd like to go to is I really think that in the China market, when you're selling B2B, the competition seems to be a lot more intense than in developed markets. And I think that perhaps the reason for this is because China's an emerging market. The resources still aren't quite as abundant as they are in Western countries. You've got a lot of companies that are trying to do the same thing. And in many ways, it seems more like a dog eat dog world where you
Mm-hmm.
have competitors who are working 996. They're going all out for the deal.
Right.
And because of that, the market moves incredibly fast, and the customers have greater expectations of the vendors that are selling them solutions. So if you're a
Right.
foreign company operating in this market, competing against Chinese, you really have to you have to compete in a different way.
Hmm. Yeah. So I just want to sort of kind of clarify the idea of 996, because not everyone may know what that means. Basically, it's working 9 to 9, 6 days a week. I don't really know who popularized it. I can probably say it's probably Jack Ma. I'm not sure, although that tends to be the direction it always points to. So it just means that people work very hard in China. So yeah, so it's a very, very competitive market in China. And when you say that you have to compete in a different way, so I one of the key differences, especially if you kind of understand the culture in China, and I have this conversation with Jordan all the time, is when when competition gets hard between, say, an American company and a Chinese company, an American company may say, well, let's not do the same thing. Let's find a different way, or let's find a better way, or let's differentiate ourselves, right? Where Chinese companies' mentality is, let's just fight it out and see who wins. That's honestly the mentality for most Chinese company. And they will, in many ways, lose so that you cannot win. That's sort of the mentality. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the fighting it out, and they'll employ a lot of different tactics, and some of them might be gaining key relationships, or maybe even finding some reason or pointing out some flaw, getting some intelligence, or even manufacturing some
Right.
facts that aren't true. So
Right.
it all happens. Everything's fair game.
This is it's it's funny, but it's actually very true in China.
So I would like to say that this isn't just between the competitors who are going after a deal. This is
Mm.
also between the customer and the vendor as well. This relationship's a little bit different. Where in the West, when a organization is considering B2B products and different vendors, often the customer will think about it in the long term as
Hmm.
a win-win sort of arrangement where they have a
Right.
relationship with a vendor where they both can benefit from that relationship, and it can be sustainable and something that they can
Hmm.
have for a long period of time.
Hmm.
But in China, I find that the balance is a little bit different. The customers have a superior position in the negotiation, and it often seems like the deals are more win lose than win win.
Right.
Yeah,
Uh,
so that's tough.
yeah, it's funny how you said that because it's pretty true in a way. Because I remember, again, I would probably have to talk about Jordan because he's got a ton of experience in this. But basically, what he said is an American company looks at, let's say it's a B2B, and I approach them with a solution to improve their business. They look at it as like, okay, you're helping me. There's some synergy here. We can mutually grow, right? That's how they look at it. A Chinese company is more like, I'm giving you a bowl of rice. I mean, that's how Chinese. It's a Chinese phrase. To give you something to eat. So I'm doing you a favor by hiring you as a service provider. So I assume that's what you mean as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, money is king. They have the cash. They're willing to give you the cash, and they're going to get as much as they possibly can from that.
So how do you think there's a way to sort of step out of that, because it doesn't really create a very good long-term environment, in my opinion, right? Like, I know I'm Chinese as well. I get that happens. But if you really think long-term, it just creates a bad experience for everybody. It doesn't last for, if the customer wins and the supplier loses, or the service provider loses, it doesn't really create a long-term good partnership in a way, right?
Right. No, and I think really the solution for this is in the relationships. And this is why relationships are so important. And you were right to make the point that it isn't just before the sale, but it's after the sale as well.
Hmm.
Because often that first sale that you make, you might go in there for a loss just to get the business, just to get the
Right.
customer, and then
Right.
hoping that as the relationship matures and you've proven your value, that the customer is going to value you more and provide you with better opportunities. And so I think that as time goes by and that relationship is built on trust,
Hmm.
then I think that that levels out a little bit. I don't think it ever truly balances in terms of the customer and the vendor being equals. I think that the customer always has a position of superiority. I think they do in the Western markets as well, but more so in China. But I think it gets more level once you have a true trusting relationship.
Yeah, I think um, I kind of, I mean, I agree, but the way I look at it is whoever has the ultimate attention to the end user generally have an upper hand because the end user is where the money initially comes from. And generally speaking, B2B service provider usually doesn't go for the end user. You're helping another company who helps their core customer base, whoever that is, right? However, I believe the tipping point in some, uh, if you were to put in a marketing term, is really sort of, I would say, positioning to be different. Where if you have a solution that nobody else can really provide, or clearly having your solution will give them 10x better returns, then in that sense, then it becomes a little bit harder for them to say replace you. I think this is the same regardless whether it's Western or China, but I kind of just sort of want to touch up on that point because what you said is very interesting.